this idea of taking up your cross. When you go to Galatians chapter 2, even though this is a verse written to a Christian church, and he is talking here about once you're a Christian, so here he's talking about I've been crucified with Christ, right? It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. But then he says something interesting. What was it that really drew Paul to the God of the Bible? What was it that really got to the point where he was okay with being stoned 3 times and whipped and thrown in prison and all that stuff? When do you think at some point he'd go, look, I've got enough of this, okay? Pick somebody else. I need a break. What was it? Okay, so what? Oh, Christ. Is that kind of like Angel Maroney with the Mormons? Joseph Smith. The reason I'm going to go out there on a bicycle and ride around is because golden tablets and Joseph Smith. Paul says something interesting in the same verse. In Galatians 2:20, he actually says, the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. What constrains Paul and motivates him is this God who he had been serving as a Pharisee, a leading Pharisee under Gamaliel, to go throw Christians in prison and do all this stuff, which he thought was awesome because he's doing God's will. That this same God loved him so much that this God would die for him. When they talk about a lot of the guys, as a matter of fact, Marcus Luttrell, one of the SEALs, when he was helping with the movie Lone Survivor, he was talking about the verse that most of the SEALs memorize and know is that verse that says, greater love does no man have but this, to lay down his life for his friends. This bond of love between Marines isn't for America. I mean, they love America, but the bottom line is it's one another, the guy next to you, right? What do you think Paul's saying here? What motivates him, no matter what, is this creator of the universe made himself known and showed him how much he loved him by giving himself for him. It's crazy. This is what it means to take up your cross. You are willing to put yourself in a position to do whatever it takes for the welfare of the one you love. So taking up your cross means looking at the value system of this God you love and deciding you're going to live a life that really honors him and brings him that glory because you love him so much, because that's what he did for you. It's real simple. Christianity is so practical. The way this whole idea of war and even families and kids and everything, it's all Christian based, if you just stop and think about it a minute. Then this thing in Acts, the book of Acts in chapter 1, verse 8, it's kind of interesting. That word in the Greek, when Jesus says literally that you'll receive power from the Holy Spirit and you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and all the earth. You know what the word witnesses is in the Greek? It's martyrs. That's what that word means. If we don't know that, you know what we're thinking? Oh, I just need to share. I need to go out and share the gospel. Jesus is going, no. I need you to be willing to give your life to me. That's what I want you to do. I want you to be willing that when you're talking to people, Jesus Christ is the most important thing in your life. And there's nobody like him. That's what he's saying. People are like, you know what? And that's why in Romans, when it says this whole idea of make yourself a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, and then it says something that's really tough, which is your reasonable service. It doesn't say it's your glorious service or it's this magnificent service. It says reasonable, right? Because he gave his life for you. So, wouldn't you want to also do that for him? That's what's going on here with taking up your cross. You guys okay? Follow him. Okay. This one means literally, if you really love him, like we just talked about with Paul, you know who you are, so you stop loving yourself. It always cracks me up in today's culture. Well, I decided to, and this is exactly what Siddhartha did with Buddhism. He left his wife and child to go find himself. Buddhism, he was a Hindu, and this whole idea of suffering he couldn't understand. So he thought the way to reach nirvana and to have true enlightenment was to abandon his family and go search out the meaning of suffering. Okay? This is this idea here of finding yourself versus, when we talk about despising your sinfulness, losing yourself. God calls you to lose yourself, not find yourself. And that leads into this idea of when you lose yourself, he's right there because you have a need. He shows up. You fall in love with him, now it's natural you want to obey him. That's who you want to follow. Now I'm going to get off on a tangent. Look at snotty, young, rich, highly educated people in our culture today. These people that come out of Yale and Princeton, when you see all these safe spaces and these snowflakes that ended up turning up into violence and all these getting in your face with their rights and everything, and they've never suffered a day in their life. They don't even know what it's like. You go back in time, they tore down Frederick Douglass's statue. If you ever study Frederick Douglass, he's awesome. Huh? He was a slave, but he talked about suffering. And he had a huge influence on Abraham Lincoln. And you read Douglass, and it's like, this guy's my hero. In that environment, what would I do? Right? And yet they tear down his statue. It's insane what we're allowing in our country that's so anti-Christian. And you can look back and see it in history and in cultures. It just keeps repeating itself. So here we have in John 14, in verse 23 and 24, it says, if anybody loves me, he'll keep my word. My Father will love him, will come to him, and will make our home with him. What do you think he's saying there? I'm going to tabernacle with you. All right? When you read John 1:14 and it says the word became flesh and dwelt among us, the Greek word there means tabernacle. He literally came and lived with mankind. When you read this verse, it's saying when you love him, he literally comes and tabernacles in your heart. He literally comes and lives with you. It's awesome. So Matthew 7:21 now is kind of a stark warning because here you have something going on. You have Jesus saying, a lot of people are going to claim that I'm their Lord, and they're going to have a rude awakening one day. He says here, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father in heaven. If you read a verse alone in its context, you sit there and think, okay, it sounds like Islam. As long as I'm following the rules and I do what he says, I can get into heaven. This is all tying together, though. What he's saying here is to know him means to deny yourself, to actually realize who he is as a person, his value system, his personality, and what he's done for you, so that naturally you want to love him and follow him. Just like a child in a family looks at their parents and goes, wow. And it doesn't happen till, you're 21, 22, 23. Then you look back and go, hey, my parents were pretty good to me and I never knew it, But when they're growing up, they think we're so hard. But this is what Jesus is talking about in 7:21. He says, don't go through life not knowing who I am and just doing the things that you think matter, because I'm going to tell you I never knew you. We shake our heads yes, but I'll give you another example. In Hosea, it says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. So what he's got in that verse is he's lining up almost like a vertical line on a piece of paper. There's two things on the left, two things on the right. Mercy on the left and not sacrifice. Knowledge of God with mercy on the left and not burnt offerings, which are sacrifice. So he's saying, you know what it means to know me? That I'm merciful and you should be merciful because you're my son. And not just doing the works of the law, just sacrificing lambs and goats and following all that stuff mechanically, because that won't matter. I don't desire sacrifices. I desire mercy. Guess what verse Jesus used when he's talking to the Pharisees? He said, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. So he's pulling people back to that. Does that make sense? That's what's going on.